Welcome to Photoactive, a podcast about photography and technology. I'm Kirk McElhearn.
And I'm Jeff Carlson.
You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. I guess today's episode is not about a really upbeat topic.
Yeah, I wouldn't say upbeat. Fascinating. I think something that has definitely compelled us. But this is the thing with photography often, right? There's a lot of amazing photography that is made under terrible circumstances. And this is kind of what we're going to be talking about now.
So we're recording this on January 14th, and it doesn't go out for 10 days. So we have no idea what the situation is going to be with the fires in Los Angeles in 10 days. Will they have spread? Will they be out? Will Mothra have come out of the Pacific Ocean to spit water on them to blow them out? We have no idea. As of today, they're worried about winds increasing. This is a disaster that it's beyond comprehension. When I look at it on the news and I see it on the BBC News here, I can't imagine myself in that situation. People who've lost their homes, perhaps their jobs. They may have no place to live because they may not have family or friends, or their family or friends may have lost their homes as well. And what are we? There are well over 10,000 homes destroyed. So, this is 30 or 40,000 people plus businesses. This is at a level that I can't comprehend.
Yeah, exactly. Also, I think, and maybe this is just because I have family that lives down there. So my wife's sister's family and her mom all live in the area. They're all fine, but especially at least at the beginning when it first happened, they were right on the edges of the, be prepared to leave your house right away. So having go bags, having a plan for where you're going to go, that suddenly became very real for a lot of people. And they know a lot of people, even, in neighborhoods nearby, whose houses are just completely gone. I guess it's compelling in the sense of the scope of it. I remember seeing, I think maybe just on the second or third day after it started happening, people were making the comparison of the amount of acres that have burned just in the Palisades fire was larger than the island of Manhattan, to give people an idea of, like just imagine all of Manhattan gone or on fire or whatever. The density and the scope and the destruction and the fact that we know people who work in tech, they went back to their house and there's a little bit of a chimney standing. And that's about it.
I'm remembering when I was in France, and I don't think they've had huge wildfires in a few years, but some of the wildfires they've had in southern France, parts of Spain, Greece, was it last year or the year before? Some of these are huge, but the difference is these are wildfires. These are forest, scrubland. I remember driving through part of southern France, an area in Provence that had a wildfire a couple of years before. It was stunning to see the damage, and I'm putting that in quotes because in that sort of environment, it grows back in a few years. I think it was Mount St. Helens where they had that eruption back in the 80s, whatever. And it didn't take long for the wildlife to grow back even more. There's even more wildlife than there had been before the eruption because it cleared off a lot of stuff. So this is sort of natural in forests, even if the way forests are maintained often means that they spread a little bit too much. But when you see homes and businesses being leveled like this, it reminds me of photos of World War II after, the Allies bombed Dresden or something like that. Anyway, we wanted to talk about the kind of photography that we're seeing. And we're not going to talk about video because we're seeing a lot of video on the news as well, but Jeff knows a couple of photographers that he follows on Instagram that make a number of these photos. And I think what really interested us is there are lots of types of photography that depend on the moment, right? Sports photography or street photography, getting the right person, the people, the story, etc. And this is the same kind of thing. And you look at some of these photos and they're a combination of, oh my God, this is scary, but also here's the humans and how small they look against these flames, and the composition of the photos is, it's really, I find some of these really moving.
Part of what drew me to this idea, not just, the fact that it's large and destructive and all of that, was you mentioned that it was hard to imagine being in this situation. And at the same time, okay, so let's put ourselves sort of in the situation. Like, we're a couple guys with cameras who know how to take photos. And you know that there are, thousands and thousands of people with cameras who know how to take photos. And actually, as a little sidebar, this sounds bad because it feels like it's capitalizing on tragedy, but it's been great to see a lot of the video, especially of like the tankers doing their work, like these massive planes that scoop water out of a lake and then go and hit everything really, really specifically and precisely. That's just been super interesting to see. But going back to my point, without trying to get too far off topic, we could go out and take pictures of this, and I'm sure lots and lots of people have. But to get good photos, to get moving photos, to get images that are more than just documentary takes a whole other level of skill. And that's partly why I pointed to these couple people that you mentioned that I follow on Instagram. One of them is just a professional photographer who goes on assignment. He shoots everything. He shot the political campaigns. He shoots everything, really. His name is Justin Sullivan. He's at Sully Photo on Instagram. And then the other one is a guy that I've followed for a little while. His name is Stuart Pally, and he's actually a fire photographer. He goes to forest fires and shoots infernos. And when you follow somebody like that, you see that there's no way your average Joe can really do a good job with this because of safety, because of just – I don't know. There are 5 or 10 things that pop into my head that we're going to talk about today that I just want to throw out all at once. And
well, the first one being you need to know how fires act so you know when to run.
Exactly. The situational awareness is so much a factor here because, you and I, we're on the street, we're watching, for people, we're, trying not to jostle somebody. We're taking pictures of monuments, or maybe we're out doing a landscape. You just have to make sure that you're not in somebody's way or you're going to get hit by a car.
In this country, if it was you, you have to make sure you look the correct way when you cross the street.
Exactly.
Sort of thing.
But when you're in a fire situation, like a forest fire especially, but even something like this, you have to know where you're going to go in an emergency. You have to know your way out. You have to know how to get there. You have to know the geography of the area. You have to know where firefighters are, where aid routes are. You have to know which way the wind is blowing. So one of the big things about this whole situation has been the wind. And the wind, it's like – I saw somebody say it's like a hurricane without water because the wind
it's very fast, dry
wind. And part of the reason this got so big so quickly is because embers from the fires got blown miles away, and that just ignited all the dry brush and everything. Not only do you have to have all the skills of being a photographer, making a composition, seeing what's going on, exposing in extremes. I mean, we talk sometimes about you don't want to blow out the highlights in the sky. Well, here you have just columns of fire.
Yeah.
When that light hits the sensor, it's going to want to accommodate and make everything else dark. And there's just a lot going on. Oh, plus you have to make sure that you're not going to get swallowed up by the fire.
Yes. Now, my guess is, and I mentioned this before we started recording, these guys are all shooting at f8. They've got their ISO set automatic with certain limitations. And there's got to be some post-processing because when you see the brightness of the flames and the darkness of the highlights that aren't that dark, there has to be some post-processing. But they don't have time to sit around and tweak their images too much. So they probably have, simple routines or simple presets that they use for this sort of thing. And if you're doing this a lot, this is what you do. You would have presets. They're probably shooting in JPEG. They don't have time to worry about RAW, because if a guy is out there shooting pictures during the day, he's got to get some pictures to whoever's hired him in the evening. It's not like you're shooting a wedding and you have 2,000 photos and you take your time looking at them. This is real fast. This is similar to sports photography. The difference with sports photography is any serious sporting event has lots of light for television. So you can easily get your exposure settings within one or two stops, right? Whereas here, you don't know what's going to happen with the flames. You don't know when the flames are going to jump up and blow out your highlights. You don't know how dark everything's going to look against the flames, right? When the flames are bright and the sensor can't cope with that difference between the brightness and the darkness. So, but again, this is kind of, I want to say bad analogy, but I spent enough time making bread that I know if a dough feels a certain way, I need to add more flour or more water, right? This is the same thing for these photographers. They know when they're looking at something what to dial in for their settings because they're experts.
Exactly. And I also think that composition becomes so much more important here. It's easy enough to go and you see something like fire and you go and take pictures because here is the fire. I mean, the fire is obviously what's going on. I've seen lots and lots of amazing images of, these giant homes just absolutely consumed in flames. And you see some of the structure or some of the windows as silhouette. I mean, it's great photography. But what I think has really drawn me to some of the photos that these guys have been making is the fire is definitely the story, but the fire ends up being the backdrop.
Particularly for the photos by Justin Sullivan, he has a lot more photos with people in them than the other guy does. And I think he's doing this for a couple of reasons. One, to show the human scale of the fire, how small these firefighters are compared to the fire, but also to show that this is not a wildfire in a forest, but this is a forest affecting people's homes and livelihoods. And so he's showing, there's one photo that I saw here, a few firemen who are, I guess, taking a break by a swimming pool because, I mean, the firemen, some of them are working 24-hour shifts, and they're sitting down by a swimming pool and resting for a little bit. So you get a slight sense of what it's like for these people to be fighting these fires.
I think it also demonstrates a good sense of scale because obviously it's huge. This is affecting so many houses and so many neighborhoods and all that. But when you see, like, for example, there's another picture of his that's actually framed really well. There's a house that's on fire, but it's not a picture of the house on fire. It's behind some sort of a gate or a fence. And so it's framed there. So you're seeing not just, hey, look, here's a house on fire, but there's some, I don't know, slightly artistic quality to it.
Well, it kind of reminds me of Charles Foster Kane's Xanadu. Remember the fences in Citizen Kane that lead up to his house? It kind of makes me think of that. And I wonder if that's kind of the image that he wanted to show was the gated community houses and that they too can burn just like everyone else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, fire does not care who it hits.
In the game of rock, scissors, paper, fire always wins.
Exactly, yes. There was another picture here.
We'll put links in the show notes to the specific photos
Definitely.
on Instagram.
There's another picture that just shows one of the fire trucks and a guy standing on top of the fire truck. But in the foreground, there's drum sets and furniture, things that have been pulled out that are valuable to somebody for some reason. It does a really good job of telling the story of not just, hey, there's a lot of stuff on fire, but this is what people's lives are like, and this is what they want to save, or this is what needs to be preserved.
I've seen a bunch of photos on social media, several that resonated with me. One of them was a photo of someone's swimming pool where they had put all their good china to protect it before they left their home. Others of people being united with their pets that they thought had been lost, and the firefighters have been saving cats and dogs from these places, and they're really moving too. Because I think people had warning. Right? I think they knew this was coming, and I believe as of today it's 24 deaths, but I don't know what the situation was. It people who didn't decide to evacuate. I mean, this didn't happen suddenly. There was enough warning for people to get out, but maybe some of them, you have a cat that goes out and doesn't come back to the house.
Mm-hmm.
You had to leave, and so you're kind of reassured when it's discovered to still be alive. But I mentioned this before we started recording. This also reminds me of Joel Meyrowitz's photos of the World Trade Center after 9/11. Now, Meyrowitz was the only photographer who was who had authority to take photos in 9/11. And I once heard him in a video explain how he did it. He went up with a big view camera. Remember, this is 2001, so early digital cameras weren't very good back then. He went up with a big view camera over his shoulder, and he just made up some story to the cops about why he had to be there. And the next day he came back, and then he officially, I think he got official authorization. So we'll link in the show notes to a page of photos from his book Aftermath, World Trade Center. And so this is not a photo of the event. This is a photo afterwards of the wreckage and of the people who were cleaning up afterwards. And for him, he was born in the Bronx. He lived in New York for much of his life. For him, this was a matter of recording this for history. It got to the point where he got to know lots of people who were working there, and he took pictures of a lot of the same people, and it's a really beautiful series of photos. It's very sad because you're looking at the remnants of a disaster, but it is the same kind of thing. A photographer who, this was not his type of disaster photography was not his the type of work he did, but he felt that he had to record this particular disaster.
That aftermath is also very compelling with the LA fires too. There are some photos. You see the remains of houses. And this comes up too with after a tornado was swept through something. And at one level, I think your brain looks and says, "Oh, it's debris. Like there's nothing left, and that's awful." What I think hits me more in some of these photos are you see a picture of a car that's been burned out. Okay, fine, car burned out. But then you notice that the wheels have half of the wheels, like the metal part of the wheels have melted. And just gives you again that scale of destruction. And again, it's telling the story of what happened and the ramifications of it, which I think is really the strength of this kind of photography.
I saw a photo on social media this morning of a house that didn't burn. It was a house that had been specifically designed to not burn, and all the houses around it had burned, and this one was scorched a little bit. It wasn't a normal shaped house. It was a kind of like a what do you call, like the windows in a church, the way they angle up, that sort of thing. So it was that sort of shape. And so it hadn't burned. And on the BBC this afternoon on the news, they were talking to someone whose house didn't burn down in a neighborhood where almost all the houses did. And I was trying to think how this guy and his family are going to live there in their house while all the rest has been burned down. First of all, if you've ever been near the remnants of a fire, it smells for a long time, particularly because there's no rain in that part of the country. So next, they're going to be bulldozers cleaning everything off. Then they're going to be rebuilding. So, do you want to even live there after that? But it would be extremely emotional to be one of the few houses left standing. I mean, on the one hand, you've got survivor's guilt, perhaps because your house wasn't hit. But looking at that around you every day, can you imagine
it's going to be rough. One of the things that I wanted to mention before we sign off here is that I mentioned situational awareness. We'll also put a link to an article that interviews Stuart Pally that's talking about when he is shooting forest fires. And basically, it's Outside Magazine. It says the gear this photographer uses to shoot wildfires. And a lot of it is which DSLR he has, which lenses, and this is actually from 2019. But you go down further, and part of what really drew me to him initially, he had made a post, and I can't find it right now, was all the other stuff that he has. And so he has clothing, hard hat, rebreathers, supplemental oxygen, all these sorts of things that he has to have just to be in that environment, because having lots of good photos, that's one thing. But you also have to make sure you're safe, you're not endangering somebody else. And that you are not a danger in the sense that if you get trapped, some other firefighter is going to have to come and get you and risk their lives and maybe not be able to fight the fire. And so, again, going back to that idea of, look, I've got a camera, I can take pictures of stuff. To do this the right way really requires a lot of expertise, a lot of preparation, quite a bit of training that I think a lot of people don't either recognize or appreciate in the moment because we're just seeing lots of fire photos. But I just want to acknowledge that doing what these people are doing and doing it well is very difficult.
My guess is he doesn't carry a lot of camera gear. None of these guys do. They may have 2 camera bodies just in case. They probably don't have any fancy lights. They may carry flashes because if it's night, you may want to illuminate something to be stronger than the fire, right? To get something in front of the fire. But I doubt they mess around with a lot of stuff. They're probably using really basic 50 millimeter lenses or zoom lenses, basic zoom lenses. They're probably not overloading themselves with gear because they have so much gear to carry to stay alive.
Exactly. And, something like this, your primary thing is you need to be mobile. There's a picture in this article of like all of his stuff laid out. And, you've got tripod, and then an axe, because you're going to need an axe to cut your way through something perhaps. And, big, thick goggles and things like that. Quite often we like to talk about people who do photography that's very different from what we do. And I find this sort of thing fascinating. I have no interest in going out and being a storm chaser or a wildfire photographer, but I can still appreciate it from afar and really, think about like what is involved in making really good images like this, not just I was there and I took a photo kind of an image.
Don't forget that they're probably taking hundreds of photos and culling and choosing the best ones. And you talked about composition earlier. I doubt they're focusing too much on composition when they're shooting, but they're cropping afterwards. One of the 2 photographers work for Getty Images, so he's got to get photos that Getty can sell, right? And he's probably not too worried about the details. In fact, it's entirely possible that they shoot a bunch of photos and send them to a photo editor who crops them afterwards.
Yeah, for solely probably.
I'd be interested to know the process for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, ideally we'd be able to talk to him, 1 or 2 of them, but I think they're a little busy.
Yeah, maybe in a month or 2, if this dies down, it would be very interesting to talk to one of them and see how they work. Okay, we're going to do snapshots?
We can do snapshots. I have one that I thought of just while we were talking.
I'm glad you always prepare in advance. Go ahead,
I'm so prepared in advance lately. Honestly, like one of the first things that came to mind with this was a movie. If you haven't seen it, there's a movie called Always that Steven Spielberg directed. It has Holly Hunter and Richard Dreyfuss, and it is about wildfire firefighters. Honestly, I've not seen it since it came out. But the visuals of it are great. It's a total romance movie. Basically, Richard Dreyfuss plays this crack pilot who is the guy that flies the planes that dumps the water and onto the forest fires. And something terrible happens. He dies. He becomes a ghost basically to her. I say this out loud and I'm like, really? It sounds kind of bizarre. But I remember it being very charming, but also very gripping in the scenes where they are fighting the fires and all of that. Maybe I'll have to try to find if that's streaming somewhere and watch it again. But yeah, always. I mean, it's Spielberg, so you're going to have a level of quality even if – I don't think it actually did very well. But yeah, it's Spielberg, so – how about you?
I've been watching a TV series on the BBC. Now, the first season of this came out in 2022, and the second season just came out recently, which is a big gap for a TV series. It's called SAS Rogue Heroes. It's about the SAS, the Strategic Air Service that was developed during World War II. And I'm not really a fan of war stuff, but it's this bunch of misfits and people who don't follow the rules. And It's like we're going to go blow up a bunch of planes, and they blow up planes, and they get into firefights and all that. And there are a lot of weaknesses in the series. It's made by the guy Stephen Knight, who made Peaky Blinders. It's professionally done. But one thing actually caught my eye as I was watching this. A lot of this is shot with a very wide angle lens, the kind that when you're seeing a bunch of people in front of you, the people on the right and the left, they're like tiny and distorted, right? That kind of wide angle. It almost looks as if the entire series is shot with the same lens to give an interesting sense of perspective, because a lot of the shots with the wide angle lens where you see the people, looking funny, don't need a lens that wide, right? You could be further back and you'd eliminate that distortion. So it almost feels like this was a choice by the cinematographer to stay up close with a wide angle lens for, I can't say everything used it, but it certainly seems that you notice this in places where it's not necessary. Anyway, so I finished the first season, which was 6 episodes. It's the second season. I don't know if this is the end, because they can't make World War II go on forever, so they have to end someplace. If you don't like things that blow up a lot, it's not very interesting. But otherwise, visually, it's fascinating. It's done in the Sahara Desert in North Africa. Apparently, the second season moves to Europe, so that will be a totally different kind of outlook. One other problem: there's only one real female character in it. Obviously, these are all guys, right? You see a bunch of whacks in the British Army office and walking around with tea or papers and stuff. And there's one woman who's Algerian. She's with French intelligence, and she becomes a love interest for one of the characters. But it's a purely testosterone-driven series. So SAS Rogue Heroes, I don't know if you get it in the U.S. It's on the BBC iPlayer here.
I think it's on Amazon. A friend of mine recommended it, and I just haven't gotten to it yet. So it is available somehow.
Okay, that's enough for this week. Now, this episode comes out in about 10 days. I hope the fires are over. Until next time.
Same here. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Photoactive. You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. We couldn't afford the M. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/photoactivecast. That's photoactivecast in one word. You can subscribe to Photoactive in your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts. See the links on our website. And think about leaving us a rating or review in iTunes or in your podcast app.